Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay. I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Believe it or not, before we began recording this, I got an email from somebody who said, I know we're in the heart of political season, but with the Yankees and Dodgers in the World Series, I want to hear Chad and Rob talk baseball. But the thing is Chad doesn't want to talk baseball with me right now. He's told me he's not my friend until November. So
listen, this didn't start with me, Rob. Kelly Armstrong, when the Dodgers and the Mets were playing, told me we are, quote, not on speaking terms. So the fact of the matter is I'm continuing that. You and I are not on speaking terms. This is the last. I'm only going to speak to our guests moving forward. I will not directly speak to you until after the World Series is done.
I can realize how intimidating it is to be taking on America's team in the World Series. But why are you laughing? All right. That's probably enough baseball talk for now. We do actually have a guest, Perrie, who's waiting patiently.
I do appreciate whoever said that we should have a whole hour on Yankees Dodgers. Yeah. Maybe we can do that if we get to a game 6 and 7. Maybe. Yeah. Rather than doing election predictions, let's do baseball. Let's do baseball predictions next week.
And I mean, one of us may not be able to stand to talk about it. It has been, this postseason has been, I mean, it's been great. Don't get me wrong. Like in a year from now, I'm going to feel good about it. Going through this postseason at the same time we're going through this election right now has been too much. And
it literally is. I wake up every morning with anxiety, and I don't know if it's related to baseball playoffs or election.
I am probably the least spiritual person in the world, and I'm like, maybe I should meditate or something. I don't know how to handle this. All right, Perrie Schafer, I'm sorry. So sorry that we went.
Yes, sir. No problem, guys.
Now, Perrie Schafer, of course, is a former longtime businessman, former chair of the North Dakota Republican Party. He's got a new organization. It's called Legendary, the Legendary Fund. Legend, he's got the N and the D capitalized in Legendary. It's very, very cute. And this organization, it's relatively new. And Perrie, I feel like we have talked about some of the impetus behind this previously on previous podcasts or previously between you and me. But tell us a little bit, what is this group? What are you, because so far what I've seen, you're setting out some press releases about doing some voter education about the ballot measures and things like that. But long term, what's the point of this group? Where are you going with this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and thank you, you and Chad, for having me on. I really appreciate it. Legendary was founded by myself and 5 other individuals, all political hacks that have been involved in the political party, the North Dakota Party, for quite some time. Coming from leadership in the state of North Dakota, as chairman of the party, coming from district leadership back in the day, from treasurer all the way through the chairman and then to the state party chairman, and actually a regional chairman at the RNC. I've got a lot of experience in how the party format and function should work. What we're missing right now in the party, and this isn't to be negative about any particular leadership person, it's to talk about how do we engage people. So we created an organization that you mentioned we call Legendary. It's a C4. So our job is to educate. So we've put together about 6 months worth of study and work and conversation and thinking about how do we present the process of moving forward with the party in the state of North Dakota. How do we represent the 80% of what you consider normies? I consider 80% of the state. How do we represent them better? How do we engage them? So we've come up with the 5 E's of Legendary. They're educate, elevate, empower, encourage, and engage. We're going to do that by communicating on a weekly basis. And you've seen some of the things we've sent out. We've started with the measures. I want to actually put a shout out here to Mr. Oban right now that done a really, really, really good job with the Keep It Local process that I'm involved with as well. And I think the other 4 measures need to get some publicity as well. So we've put out verbiage about measures 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all the way down the list. And we've also put out some information about the current state of affairs of our party, a call for true leadership. What are some of the problems we're facing? How do we engage the 47 districts, people within the 47 districts to get engaged and to be involved in their party moving forward? And more importantly, why is that important? Why is it important to be engaged with your local grassroots party? So that's the impetus behind it. That's what we've created. We've done a good job with it at this point, up to this point.
Perrie, I know you said it's not a shot at current leadership, but a lot of what you just described there are things that a state political party generally would do in terms of engaging at the grassroots 47 district level. Is this because the state party isn't doing the right things? Is it because the state party is handcuffed? I mean, the reality is the state party has to support their endorsed candidates, right? I mean, that's the way it works. So why did you see a need for this, and why not work through the party structure to do exactly what you just laid out there?
I would have loved to have worked through the party structure to get someplace within the state party. If you went to the convention, I know that you're in a different party than I am, Chad, but if you went to the state convention recently, it would have revealed where we're at from a North Dakota Republican Party. That's not a lot different than maybe the Democratic Party overall from a national level, right? There's a certain group of individuals from either side of the aisle that are loud and they make a lot of noise. They're not the real majority. We do not want to exclude them in any way, shape, or form. We want to include them. We want to be able to disagree respectfully and row in the same direction of party politics. I personally like Republican leadership within our state. You and I may argue about that, Chad, but I like Republican leadership in our state because I see where we've gone 35 years ago to where we're at today from a business standpoint. One of my companies covers 6 states. We've got offices in Minneapolis and Gillette, Wyoming, and our main office is here in Mandan, North Dakota for a reason. Because the business climate is perfect for having businesses in the state of North Dakota. So that's what we're trying to do, is to get people engaged. When the loud side of either party is making a lot of noise, then the 80% don't make a lot of noise. Excuse me, they don't get engaged. They're not boisterous about things. And we're trying to say to people out there, through an education process, through an empowering process, through an encouragement process, that it's important for them to be engaged in their party and in their party politics.
I want to put some data behind what you're saying, because if we look at what happened in the convention endorsing process, which is, endorsements happening at the local level, and then of course statewide endorsements at the state convention, what we saw at this last convention was the convention passed over an incumbent for superintendent, Kirsten Baszler, who had been successfully elected to that office multiple times previously, had no problem. And they passed over her for somebody who ultimately took not even second place, but third place on the statewide ballot. The convention endorsed Alex Balaz, and I don't want to run down Alex Balaz, but he was relatively unknown guy. I think he would say, that was a challenge that he had to overcome, as not very many people knew who he was. They endorsed him over a longtime public service commissioner, and Alex Balaz ended up getting fourth place, I should say, in the U.S. House race, a five-way race. So I think when you're saying that we have a noisy minority who are controlling the party, I think it's right, and I think those two election results bear that out. The thing is how do you get? Is it really just about identifying that 80% and getting them back involved in the party, in the political process? Is that your goal?
Yeah, that's exactly the goal.
So how are you going to do that?
Well, I think we've already done it. We've already started doing it. You know, what happened in the last election cycle? When you look at the races you just talked about, you look at the legislative races in respective districts around the state, the 80% of the state of North Dakota that were encouraged and were engaged by organizations like ours to get off the couch and vote did. And the individuals that won those races were the individuals that would represent the 80% population of the state and how that the 80% think. So it's already happening. It's already beginning. And again, this isn't an us versus them thing. I was accused of us versus them when I was chairman of the party. That's just a falsehood, period. Leadership takes leadership. I mean, when you're in the trenches and you're elected to lead, then you need to lead. You need to look at where the party is at, and you need to lead the party forward. I think we did a really good job of that. When I was chairman, we won the races all the way down the line from a 80% representative standpoint for our state. We did the same thing at the national level when I was regional chair of the RNC. So now we're in a scenario, and I can argue both parties are in a scenario where the everyday person doesn't feel that they're being heard, even though they make up the 80% of the population in the thought process within the state. So I think we're already doing it, and I think we're making headway already.
Perrie, one of the things you mentioned is this idea of sort of this vocal minority on the right. And obviously, I think you're right. It's in both parties. It's just it's in North Dakota. There's just more Republicans, right? I mean, so I think there's problematic people on the left. There's just fewer of them in North Dakota, and wanting to keep them in the fold and just be able to have conversations with them. And just, I mean, again, I'm on with the two of you. The three of us agree on some things and disagree on other things. The things we disagree on, we don't get mad at each other.
Right.
So I am a little concerned with what we saw last night coming from a state senator up in District 18, Scott Meyer, who threatened violence against his opponent because his opponent was simply campaigning and putting out votes that he had. Scott would be considered part of that normie crowd, as would Jason Doctor, as would a lot of other people who maybe are getting a little bit too comfortable. How do you balance those? How do you clean up your own house if sometimes I see the normies holding Nico Rios to one sort of standard and Scott Meyer and Jason Doctor to another standard? I mean, I think that's what the biggest problem the normies are going to have moving forward is they're not consistent with how they treat people in their caucus. So what would you say to that? When I see like the ethical issues going on with North Dakota Republicans, it's not just the Bostiets, it's not just the traditional Republicans. It's a lot of stuff going on both sides of those factions.
That's a good question. And to be frank with you guys, we are an imperfect human being, right? All of us. I mean, you make decisions on emotion, whether you're part of the 80% crowd or you're part of the 20% crowd on either side of the party, or either with either party, you make bad decisions. That's just the way it is. I mean, in the business world, I've learned back in my 20s and in my 60s now that emotions don't make for good leadership and don't make for good decisions. I look at the comment you just made, Chad, about Senator Meyer, whom I think is the better candidate, whom I think will win the race, and whom I support all the way, as making a bad decision. I mean, the emotions don't make for good decisions, period. End of story. Part of what Legendary is talking about is, do we know the truth? Are we educated? Are we reading information that tells us the truth? Are we listening to Facebook and being cranked up by some Facebook post that isn't even accurate or truthful? You know, as chairman, I was shot every single day by the Facebook posts and the different types of communications that are out there that were not accurate. So we're saying to people, you're smarter than that. Where are you getting your information? Let's get educated. Let's help empower you to be educated. Let's encourage you to be educated. Let's communicate so that we're all on the same page. And then you vote the way you want to vote. That's entirely up to you. It's why we're laying out the measures. It's why I was on Joel Heitkamp the other day talking about Measure 4. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We agree on Measure 4 that it needs to be a no vote, period.
So, Perrie, can I just follow up really quickly, because I don't want to miss the point I'm trying to make, and that's how, Scott Meyer does one thing. You say he got emotional. We all get emotional. A lot of people, if they get liquored up and punch somebody, they end up in jail. Or if they threaten people, they end up in jail. And then you got Nico Rios, who got liquored up, was emotional, and did all these different things. And he should resign, according to many normies. But we're not hearing the same thing about Scott Meyer or in Jason Doctor, who's been convicted of breaking the law. Why are those two groups held to different standards? And you may think that Scott's voting better, but don't you think that we are better than having and he's not a 22-year-old kid. He's a 40-some-year-old senator who got liquored up and threatened violence against his opponent because his opponent was pointing out his voting record.
Yeah, and shouldn't.
Why is that different than Nico Rios? Why is that different?
Yeah, it's not different from an ethical standpoint or from a comparisons standpoint. Bottom line is the districts need to deal then with their individuals. I mean, in Rios's situation, their district had asked him to step down. Right? Now, whether that happened or not isn't the point, but their district did the right thing by asking him to step down. But there was a lot more to that story, as I understand it, than what I'm seeing from Scott. So I think District 18 needs to take a look at what's going on behind the scenes there. If there's some help that needs to be done for either one of those two individuals. I mean, I'm involved in an organization called Face It Together. I come from an alcoholic family. I get it. I understand. But again, it comes down to responsibility. It comes down to doing the right thing. And I think I'm not going to throw darts at Nico, and I'm not going to throw darts at Scott. I'm going to say emotions make for bad decisions. Blowing it out of proportion is not the right way to handle things, right? Dealing with our internal problems probably makes a lot more sense. And what Legendary is trying to bring this back around to Legendary, what Legendary is trying to do is to engage people from the 20% side and from the 80% side. Where do we agree? What do we have in common? How can we move the party forward by being connected at the hip and move in a forward position? Chad, you and I are in agreement on things politically, right? And we're in different parties. I have very good relationships with a lot of Democrats, including the past state party chairman. We have a very good relationship. We don't agree on a lot of things. My neighbor is Heidi Heitkamp. I think the world of her. We don't agree on very many things, but we're not yelling and screaming at each other. We're not being adversarial to each other. We're not trying to grow horns on each other, things of that nature. And that's what we're trying to do with Legendary is engage everyday human beings to be involved in their party, to see the truth, to be able to understand the rhetoric versus the facts, and then make decisions moving forward from there, from a leadership standpoint. That's what we're trying to produce through Legendary.
So if people want to get involved in this, what can they expect? Are they just going to get newsletters? Because I mean, a lot of what you're saying is great, but I'm also looking at the way in which, I think the noisy wing of the party, the way that they've been effective in getting their people into local leadership levels, statewide leadership levels, and even winning some elections. And the way they've done it is they've identified their people and they've got them out to the right meetings. Yep. So, I mean, is that what you're planning to do? Because it seems to me like ultimately you could talk to people and you could tell them and they'll read your email and they'll nod. But if they're not in a meeting, if they're not participating, then what's the point? What are we? We're just singing Kumbaya then, right? So where does the rubber meet the road on this?
No, you're exactly right. Getting people involved and engaged in their district meetings, in their district events, in their district party, all the way up through the line. No question about it. We're already doing events around the state. I've been traveling a lot, to be very honest. In my business world, other people are taking care the day-to-day operation. That gives me time to be reaching out to different districts and to different areas around the state and talking to people about exactly how you just explained it, Rob, is to go out and engage people with meetings and potlucks and events and what have you, just to get people to come sit down in the room and have a conversation and talk about it and explain why it's important, because politics controls everybody's life. Whether you're involved in politics or not, your life's controlled by the decisions that are made in politics, period. So what we're trying to say is come to the meetings, understand what's truthful, understand what's correct, and then make your decisions by yourself going forward. So yes, we're engaging around the state. We've got over 50 leaders around the state now engaged with Legendary that are doing leadership meetings around the state and doing them very well. So we're very pleased as to where we're at presently.
So I think Rob sort of hit on the most difficult part of this, and that is to get people to show up, right? I mean, it's very difficult to think about. I mean, I don't go to political meetings anymore. I'm too busy. And then often what you find is that you go to a political meeting and that vocal minority, both parties, dominates it, makes the meetings last 10 times as long as they should, and people get burnt out and they don't want to come back. And not to mention it's a societal change of people aren't engaging in meetings and organizations as much. How do you get over that? I mean, how do you get somebody who, I care about my community, but man, do I not want to go and listen to some guy go off for 4 hours on some crazy thing they saw on the internet?
Yeah, I agree. That's really hard, Chad. It's a good question, and it's really hard. I can just tell you from 22 years in the political world, if you don't physically get engaged, then bad things happen. End of story. I mean, if you don't, my little grandma, 4'7", 13 kids, would self-educated, would tell me, if you don't show up to the party, you can't make the rules. Period. That is absolutely true. And again, I don't want to make that sound like that we're trying to, or that we advocate for eliminating anyone from going to meetings. We don't want that. Leadership takes leadership. You have to get engaged at the grassroots level in order to lead. Coming into the party 15 minutes before a national committee man is elected, and then becoming the national committee man 15 minutes before the vote, well, say a month before the vote, is not leadership. That's taking advantage of laziness that people didn't show up to their own convention. And that happens throughout the whole state, from the Democratic side and on the Republican side. We see it blatantly on the Republican side now because we have so many Republicans in our state. No question about that. But it's in both sides. I do a lot of national work as well. So what we're trying to say is, Chad, let's have a conversation. Rob, let's have a conversation. Why is it important to be at the table? You and I have been at the table on several things on Measure 4 together, and we agree moving forward why. Now, legislatively, there needs to be something done, and I'm saying that there is being heavy discussions on Measure 4 right now from a legislative and from a leadership standpoint. So being involved is why is what matters. Trying to spew my opinions on you and make you believe me and listen to me isn't the solution. Showing you the truth, empowering you to study and to read, elevating you to say you do matter, you do make a difference, we do want you involved, right? That's what we believe is the right way to go about it. So that's the reason why we put Legendary together.
I think one of the problems we face is that the style of politics that we're trying to get people to engage with is not very sexy. It's a lot more, setting aside questions about content and ethics and morality, it's a lot more fun to the us versus them, the other side's got demon horns. That's more fun. I mean, it's like we're Christian rock and they're AC/DC. That's hard. That's a hard thing to overcome. Because what we're selling is kind of boring. Like, let's come and let's understand you're not going to get everything you want. What they're selling is you can get everything you want. If you show up and we expose the pedophiles and all the other terrible people in politics and everybody's corrupt that we don't agree with, and if we expose them all, then we'll win and we'll get all the things we want. That's what they're selling.
And not have to pay for it.
And you won't have to pay for it, right? Yeah, that's what they're selling.
And you don't have to lead. You don't have to lead. You can just show up and it'll be a circus. Everybody else saying kumbaya. That doesn't work that way.
I mean, putting it
That's the way the real world works.
Yeah, I mean, putting in the context of Measure 4, I mean, that's what they're selling. We can get rid of, you don't have to pay property taxes anymore. And other people will pay the taxes. And you don't have to worry. We'll find money hidden in the basement of the Capitol or something to pay for all this. And like I feel like I'm the grown up saying, no, you can't just put it all on the credit card. You want parks? You got to pay for parks. You want fire protection? You're going to have to pay for fire protection. I don't know how so many people who think of themselves as conservatives have lost the plot on the idea that you have to pay for what you get.
Because they're not educated, and politics is hard. Making decisions is hard. Running companies is hard. I mean, which hard are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the hard that you have to buckle down and make good decisions that make sense? Or are you going to choose the hard that sings kumbaya every night and does nothing and everything goes to hell? Which hard are you going to choose, right? So the way we look at it from a leadership standpoint is leaders need to lead. And that's what Legendary is trying to do, and is exactly what we're doing. Measure 4, for example. You vote yes on Measure 4, you're voting for a tax increase in some way, shape, or form. Plain and simple, period. That's the mathematics behind it. You know, in my opinion, the individuals trying to promote Measure 4 as a property tax savings vehicle are simply trying to railroad people into thinking everything will be great after this thing, should this thing pass. Just the opposite is going to happen. Exactly the same conversation I had with term limits. You know, I may support term limits at the national level. I certainly don't support them at the state level for multiple reasons, which we can get into on some other podcasts if you want to go there. But that's the reason for Legendary, is to say what's truthful and what's Facebook emotional. Let's look at the difference, and let's engage and come to the meetings, and let's take the leadership positions back in our party.
I appreciate you coming on. I really do. And for what it's worth, I mean, I think one thing your group's going to have to do, especially if you're encouraging people to run for district chair or, you know, run for party treasurer or get involved in some way, is you're going to meet people who don't want you there, and they're going to say mean things about you. And if my experience could tell you anything, is somebody who gets insulted daily. You know, I wake up every morning to a long list of emails that people sent me overnight that are all sorts of ugly. And I could tell you, it's not that bad. They'll say terrible things about you, and you just smile at them and say, all right. And then you go about your business. You know,
couldn't agree more.
You can't give them power. Perrie, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. The website, if you want to learn out more, is ndlegendary.org. They got more information there if you want to check it out. Perrie, thanks for your time.
You bet. Thanks, Naomi.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, for the second part of our interview, our show today, and by the way, there is going to be a third part. Normally, there's not. So if you're thinking, God, I don't want to sit through them interviewing Thomas Beadle, that's that's on you. I think he's that's fair. I think he's very intelligent and engaging. But there is going to be another part after this, so don't tune out. And by the way, you know what I'm surprised at, Chad, is nobody's noticed the little Easter egg audios I've been dropping in at the very end of the podcast. I don't know. Nobody's emailed me about them yet. I've been waiting for people to catch them. Do you know I've been doing that?
No, what have you been dropping in?
You got to go back and listen. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about...
Hold on, is it while I'm on air with you that you're dropping these things in?
I'm dropping them in when I edit afterwards. I take a little clip from something we said at the beginning and I put them at the end.
Oh, you're kidding. Well, see, I
know Beadle knows what I'm talking about, right? You've been hearing this? Yeah. Beadle.
Ever since you've shaken up how the intro and everything goes, it's, with the whole new bump coming into the beginning, you also have some bumps going out at the end. I mean, it works well.
Beadle is...
So, Rob, I will tell you, I mean, I think we're learning something. I don't listen to the whole episodes. I live it in real time.
It would be a little weird. If I listen for, like, quality control, I'll go back and just, critique myself or whatever. But yeah, it'd be a little weird if we listened to our whole episodes. But there are little Easter eggs at the end I think are fun.
Well, now I'll start listening. And if I do listen, I just fast forward through you and just listen to me anyway.
Yeah,
I only listen to you guys at 1.5 speed anyway, so.
1.5. I wonder what my voice sounds like at one. I'm probably pretty squeaky at 1.5 speed.
You're good.
Okay, we were actually going to talk about something substantive here. We're going to talk about the Legacy Fund, where last week on Friday we had a couple of lawmakers from the Jamestown area, Representative Perrie Schafer, Representative Mitch Osley, talking about the Legacy Fund. They have a bill called the Legendary Fund Transparency Act, and it's pretty simple the way they describe it. They want all the investments of the Legacy Fund listed on the state's website somewhere under maybe the SIB website, or sure, it doesn't matter where, just so long as they're listed somewhere, that's what they want. But I feel like there's two parts of this debate. One is this very specific proposal that they're putting forward in the bill. Should we do that? Is that something we can do? Make all the investments transparent on the website? Then there's also this larger debate going on, which I think is a part of even a larger debate. The largest debate being, what is the Legacy Fund for? We still haven't figured that out. Subsequent to that is, how are we investing the Legacy Fund? Can we invest more in North Dakota? We've seen some legislation. We've started doing that. Should we be invested in these other companies? What's the investment strategy? And then we have this, can we make all the investments transparent? So, Thomas, you sit on, as dint of being our state treasurer, you sit on the state investment board. The very specific proposal that they're putting forward, the Legacy Fund Transparency Act, is that doable? Is that something you support?
So first off, thanks for having me on. Legacy Fund is one of the most important things that we have benefiting North Dakota. It's a tremendous asset. I'm always happy to put some sunshine in the Legacy Fund and talk about it any day. So thank you for having me on. So the Legacy Fund has a whole bunch of things happening with it right now that are super awesome and cool. A lot of the stuff that they are talking about, we are doing, but there's always things that we can do better. So to back up a little bit, yes, as by virtue of being state treasurer, I serve on the state investment board. I also serve on the land board. I also serve on the Legacy and Budget Stabilization Advisory Board. And so I get to see a lot of different vantage points of how our state investments are handled and what we're doing for the benefit of North Dakota citizens. And we've done a ton. When I came on as state treasurer 4 years ago, our state investment board, the Retirement Investment Office, had 3.5 individuals overseeing $20 billion in invested assets. So, and I say 3.5 because our chief investment officer was also our executive director. So he had to also run the retirement program and the Teachers Fund for Retirement Board. And so we have now since split those positions up. We have a dedicated chief investment officer. We have expanded it. So instead of just having 3 individuals underneath them, we have 8. We're in the process of growing that to 12. And this is all change that we've had happen in the last 3 years since the 21 legislative session when we got approval for that from a funding perspective. And what that does is it allows us to mature our investment team, mature our oversight, and actually do the stuff that we're wanting to do. Because the problem that we ran into is 3 years ago when we only had 3.5 people overseeing all of the state's investments, is we were basically like a large city fund where we had some people that could do some due diligence, meet with some fund managers, but we were 100% or nearly 100% reliant on the consultants. At the time, we were contracted with Callan on the consultants to help us do performance, benchmarking, do all sorts of stuff. And we relied heavily on the resources our consultants had to help us choose the fund managers accordingly. And then we would meet with them maybe maybe annually to kind of get checkups in terms of how those managers are performing, et cetera. What we've been able to do now is we've been able to get our staff built up in a way. So we have 2 risk officers which help us with compliance and mitigating all of the parameters around country risk, political risk, various risks associated with different asset types between our equities and fixed incomes, and what we have to look at there from a currency level or interest rate or whatever. All the different risk portfolios we have to manage there. We have a dedicated U.S. equity team. We have a dedicated fixed income team. And so right now they've been in the process of going through and revamping all of our fund managers, rearranging our portfolio to allow us to be a lot more efficient. But then also in this last legislative session, we got approval from the legislature to start bringing our investments in-house so that we can manage them here in North Dakota with our own team. And so that's something that we're in the process of rolling out, but it takes a tremendous amount of back office work to make that happen. And so we've been making a lot of progress. We haven't gone live with it yet, but we're getting closer every day. And so I just wanted to set the table for where we were to where we're going towards, because that change is what's going to allow us to do a lot of the transparency, a lot of the adjustments that people are looking for. So like right now, when you go on to the State Investment Board's website, we do have a list of all of our investment holdings for the state of North Dakota, because what we do is we hire a fund manager. So we have an asset allocation that's set by our clients. For the legacy fund, the client is the Legacy and Budget Stabilization Advisory Board, the legislative board. They set the asset allocation. They set the investment policy statement. They tell us that we want 18% of this fund invested in international equities, or 19% is, I think, what they specifically have in their asset allocation. That's the legislative committee tells us that's how they want it. So then we go out and we hire fund managers that fulfill that objective.
Let me jump in. So,
yep.
So if I think what I heard you just say is that we're already doing it.
We are doing it in a way, but the difference is, since we don't currently choose individual company investments, we invest in, say, for our international piece, we'll invest in William Blair International Leaders Fund 3. And so we know that them as a fund manager have a track record, a success. It might be a $80 billion fund, and we're going to invest $40 million into this fund. So we invest into the fund. And so we show that right now.
So we show that we're invested in a fund. We don't necessarily show the underlying investments.
Correct, because right now we don't have the since we don't manage those individual investments, we don't have the pass-through to pull that in real-time information. So if we want to get that, we have to do a request out to those fund managers, find out what that holding is today, and then get that back. And so that's why we can't show it real-time online.
Okay. Well, is there a problem doing that then? Because I just want to get down. I mean, is there? I mean, from your perspective, is there a problem if this bill passes? Does that create any problems for us, or is it something we can do?
So it depends on the parameters. I have to see exactly what the bill is. But
and to be fair, we don't have a bill draft. We have the way that they characterize it.
For public equities, there's really not much of an issue with doing that, especially once we have our internal program going, because when we're making the investments ourselves, no problem. We can put that online because we have that in-house. We'll have the clearing houses for all that sort of stuff. We'll have all those specific holdings snapshot in time because we're the ones doing it. So as we ramp up our internal capabilities, there's no issues there. The problem that we do run into is on the private equity side. So private equity is a whole different animal, and that's something that is always going to have some consternation with it, because by virtue of it being private, certain things are commercial confidential information that we're not able to share because it jeopardizes the position for the value of that company or that fund. So for example, the in-state investment program, so far we've deployed $49 million of capital invested into companies in North Dakota. We've done a funds of funds approach. So we invest in 5 funds. They bring in private sector dollars. So that $49 million we've deployed is actually $135 million that's been invested into North Dakota companies because of that multiplier effect. So it's been successful, especially in the 2 years since we've been launching that. But when we go into a company like Bushel, that's one of the prominent ones that we've made an investment into, they're actively out there raising money on the private markets right now. So if we are public and we are telling everyone we got this percentage ownership for this dollar amount while they're going out there and trying to continue to raise capital, it hurts their ability to raise capital at a higher valuation and hurts our ability to then exit that position later at a higher valuation because it's so clear cut what we got it for. Because unlike public equities, you don't see a ticker price going in real time with that investment. This is something where maybe because we're the first one in, we're getting a better deal, a better price point than the next person coming in, for example. And so when you're dealing in the private equity space, there's always going to be a little give or take there, which is why even like Alaska, which has an online dashboard for their investments, doesn't have any private equity information on there. They just will give you the aggregate total amount. In Norway, which is often referenced, they don't have any private equity holdings in their fund. So because they can't provide that transparency piece. So there's some differences in terms of how we need to do that. So as long as the legislature directs us in our asset allocation, we have to have private equity. We're going to have some issues around.
Because one thing that's been very popular is we said we want to invest in North Dakota companies, not private equity, and then we run into the problem you just described.
Right, and so that's going to create an issue. So there are things that we can do better. There are things that we can continue to improve on, and we are constantly working to try to do that and to get feedback from our fund managers of, can we put the last year's annual report? Do we have make sure that we have contractual permission that we can put that on our websites? Like information like that we want to try to put out there. So it might not be real time to today, but maybe it's to last quarter or last fiscal year, and try to get as much information out there as possible. And so we have to work with those funds, work with those investments to make sure that we can get that into the contract language.
Thomas, I want to bring up some specific things that were talked about last week. I thought both legislators from Jamestown were sort of aggressive towards the state investment board, and then I wouldn't say they're accusations, but we heard about that the state investment board is in derivatives that are a ticking time bomb. We basically heard that the state investment board has invested in these Russian bonds, a Canadian bank who's having all these problems, and essentially saying the state investment board's been asleep at the switch or falling for people in fancy suits coming in from San Francisco. Can you just respond to the sort of the state investment board's been asleep at the switch, the derivatives piece, and all that? Like, what would you say to because there were some pretty aggressive shots at the state investment board.
Yeah, there sure were, and I would love for legislators to show up for those SIB meetings and sit in on them, or reach out with any questions before they go to the press. That would be lovely, or even talk to the legislative members that are on the committee, because remember, the legacy fund is the client that runs that fund is the Legacy and Budget Stabilization Advisory Board. They set the investment parameters, the goals, and the objectives. The state investment board is just the one that carries it out. So it's a legislative committee that runs this fund. But from an investment standpoint, in terms of some of those accusations, first off, we don't pick and choose individual investments. We hire fund managers to follow through with those investments. Our fund managers on an international level, because we have a direction for international equity, our fund managers are given the parameters of, we do not want exposure into anything that is on State Department's risk list. So if the State Department has come out with, these companies are foreign agent actors, these companies are working with XYZ people, and so they have them on a risk list, those are prohibited from being invested with our dollars. That's something that we're very clear on, because we, with the absence of a state law that puts that restriction in place, we fall back onto the federal guidelines for that. So that's how we limit some of that international exposure. The Canadian bank, for example, we are invested into a fund. That fund had some holdings in the Canadian bank. I don't know if you know this. Companies like Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, Bank of America have also had multi-billion-dollar settlements because they run into issues every now and then. So is that a problem? Yes, but that's a non-unique problem when it comes to investments. Sometimes there are risk and issues, but the underlying investment, that doesn't mean that it's an improper or misguided investment. So we continue to monitor that, and our staff, as we've been ramping up the horsepower, our staff has more resources so that they can go out, vet all of these holdings, make sure that we're giving the diligence and care necessary for all of these things. And that's something that, as we continue to build up our internal investment processes, we can continue to do that with our own holdings. And so we're going through the process right now of getting the proper licensing and certification so that we can trade some of these securities on the international level and with different exchanges in different areas, so that our staff can get directly in there to work on that. So this is a problem in an area that we are constantly evolving to try to get better on, so that we can put those better securities and guardrails in there, but it all takes time to do so. With regards to derivatives and stuff, that's another thing where we don't do that specifically, but some of our fund managers, they'll have that as part of their portfolio. It might be a 1% of the portfolio that they have where they'll deal with some derivative areas, but it's not like we're throwing $100 million at a derivative portfolio and just focusing on that. But there's also a difference between, when you talk about derivation of value and what is a derivative, different people have different definitions of what that is, because there are some different exchanges. If you're buying a stock, you're betting on the valuation of that stock based off of the forward price and earnings ratio for what that's looking like it's going to be. So, I mean, it's that you're betting on future value. You're betting on what that derivation is. So, I mean, there are derivatives involved in any of our holdings. That's just a fact. But in terms of like the high risk derivative investments, like you might have thought of during the 2008 financial crisis, that's something that we make sure that we have risk tolerance ranges in there. We set parameters for our fund managers for how far they can deviate from a strategy before we put them on a watch list or we terminate with that fund manager. So there's stuff that we're working on there. With regards to the Russia bond stuff, we did have some exposure, but we bought bonds, we bought financial instruments, or our fund managers did, on the secondary market. It wasn't us going to Putin saying, hey, do you need some money? Here's some money. We're now going to buy that bond. It was somebody else had this bond. They sold it at below par value. Our fund manager acquired it. So then we held it. We earned some revenue off of it. We then exited that position. But that was how we acquired some of those. So it's kind of secondary market.
Is it safe to say that maybe we got into the Russian bond market or maybe some of these other salacious investments because we weren't staffed up, and because you started out talking about, we're staffing up, we're doing more internal oversight. Did some of that stuff slip through because we weren't doing it previously, and this is an area?
I wouldn't say that it slipped through. I would say that because we rely 100% on outside fund managers to manage that stuff, they're making trades day in, day out without talking to us about things. The more that we're able to internally manage that trading, then we can have 100% control over that. And one of the issues that we ran into with the Russian one is we were in commingled funds for a lot of these international holdings. And so what that means is we buy into, we have $50 million of a $5 billion fund. And so if that $5 billion fund has $10 million of Russian bonds in it, then we have a tiny little sliver of that. But if we want to get rid of our tiny sliver, the only way we were able to do so was to sell out of our entire $50 million position of the whole fund. And so we got into an issue where we were trying to put pressure on our managers, get them to get rid of those holdings. We were a small piece of the pie, so they weren't really listening. And so we kind of had some pushback until, enough other people started to get pressure on there. Then they were able to divest those holdings and get out of it. Similarly, so what we've been doing is trying to lower our exposure in commingled funds. If we are relying on outside fund managers, we want to be separately managed funds, because then we can put much more restrictions than guardrails, and we can track it and hold their feet to the fire a lot better on it. And so we've been able to do that. And that's why, like, if you compare us to the index benchmark, if the index benchmark says we should have 5% of our international holdings should be in China, we're at 1.5%, because we are putting tighter guardrails on some of those areas in our separately managed accounts.
Let me and just one follow up. So I'm looking at a memo that Representative Satchram sent to Jan Murtha, who's one of the staff at the RIO, and one of the things that he writes in here is that these legacy funds, and I'm quoting now from his memo, these legacy fund investments are just a few that we have reviewed during our tenure in the legislature, and they do not include any investments totaling over $3.1 billion, which remain hidden from public view in commingled funds that legislators are not even allowed to see. I feel like you've addressed some of this, but that was one thing, and I think that they were pointing to some things like, we'd say, oh, we're invested in emerging markets or Southeast, or it was more like regional details, but no specifics. Address that. I mean, that's a big chunk of the legacy fund, $3.1 billion, and they're saying there's no transparency on it whatsoever. Address that claim.
Yeah, I mean, that's not an accurate claim. That is the issue that we're running into with some of the commingled funds, is that there's delays in terms of time period of getting some of that information out there. And so we are certainly, working to do that, but that's not accurate. I mean, our global piece of the international exposure globally is $2.5 billion for the legacy fund right now. And so, it's not $3.1 billion of hidden area. Now, where they are having issues, and that's where I mentioned about the private equity piece, is we do have private equity holdings, both international, domestic, and in-state. And the private equity piece, that's an area where we have some individuals that are trying to get every single holding specific to it. So they want this fund manager in every single holding that fund manager has at what dollar amount. And the fund manager says, that is our secret sauce. That's how we are making our investment returns for this fund. So we can't give you the breakdown of which manager holds exactly which holding at what dollar amount, because that gives away their commercial confidential information for how they operate their fund. So what we'll do is we'll give them, here's the list of all the managers, or here's the list of all the holdings, but we're not going to draw that line to everyone. And so that's where there's some, cloudiness that some folks are talking about in terms of, where they can see that info. But that's another area where, as we ramp up our own internal support structure, we're going to be able to have better tools and resources to do that. And I would love us to be able to have as many holdings as possible online in real time on the website, but that takes resources to make that happen. I mean, we need some IT changes to make that happen.
Well, maybe that could be part of the Legacy Fund Transparency Act.
Yeah, I think it should, and I would support that. And I would, if we have a statutory language that says here are the countries that we don't want to be a part of, great. Then we have that for our fund managers to hold on to. So we can certainly do that, but we need to watch out for always being the flip side of every coin. I mean, we talk about no foreign ownership of North Dakota property, for example. That's an issue that comes up all the time. Well, you have Cirrus Aircraft up in Grand Forks that's owned by a company that's based out of the country. You have Doosan Bobcat that's South Korean, owned by so you have little issues like that you always have to be watching as well. And so there's certainly stuff that we can work on.
You'd mentioned the fund managers and having a lot of fund managers. What is the process that the state board looks at in terms of getting rid of a fund manager? I mean, are there fund managers who are underperforming, and is there a process to remove them, or are you just stuck with them forever?
Nope. So we have contractual guidelines with our fund managers. So we will put on parameters for their investments. So here's the investment strategy that they have. They're going to be this percentage of this kind of holding. This is kind of the risk tolerance level and some of the parameters that they'll have around there. We'll monitor them to see whether they deviate, one way or another. And then we're also tracking their performance 1, 3, 5, 10-year basis. If we see differentials in the performance, if we see significant management changeover of folks that are on the investment team, if we no longer have faith in their management, then we have shepherd hooks that we can use to yank those dollars back out of there. Sometimes it becomes an issue of, are we going to get par value off of that investment if we yank it too quick? But for the most part, if it's due to an underperformance, we can get out of there without those penalties. It's just a matter of what that price point is that we can sell it at for today's value. Just last month, we fired a fund manager and moved to some different ones on a real estate holdings basis to shift around some of our managers that way. And so we do that frequently. Our staff reviews all of our managers at a minimum annually to see how they're doing compared to all of their peers for similar property types or similar asset types, to see how their performance has been over the X period of time, to see how their management changeover has been. They review those every year at least once, meet with those managers individually at least once. They do it much more frequently than annually, but that's the minimum that they have on there. And then they'll make recommendations to, we have and the state investment board has an investment subcommittee. So they'll make recommendations to the investment subcommittee that'll then review that in detail to then move forward with those recommendations for terminating a manager, finding a different manager for everything. One of the other things I would also like to mention too, when we are trying to find a fund manager for, let's say it's a domestic U.S. equity. So we have a sleeve of our asset allocation that's about 27%. That's domestic equity that deals with large cap, small cap, total U.S. market for publicly traded equities. If we have a shortfall or an area that we need to put more money in because we are below our target for asset allocation for the percentage of our fund, then we will do a manager search to try to find an additional manager that can help us with that piece. One of the things that the legislature passed a couple of years ago is we have an in-state preference language. So what we've done, we worked with the Independent Community Bankers Association and the Bank Association in North Dakota to put together a list and kind of walk through kind of the parameters of this. Anytime we're looking for a fund manager, we will do a canvas of the large firms around the state and say, we are looking for a manager that can handle this kind of investment for this asset type. Is this something that you want to put in a proposal for? And so we will do that for all of our, anytime we're going to find a new manager right now. And so that we are touching base with North Dakota firms to try to give them opportunities to manage these investments.
Well, Thomas, I think this debate is a hard needle to thread, because on one hand, I do want more transparency, and I think we're moving in that direction based on the things.
And I agree with that.
I think we want more transparency. We want to make sure that the state of North Dakota and its leaders and its people are in the driver's seat on this stuff and setting, these are the values that we want it. On the other hand, I don't want to get to a point where we're imposing, the politics du jour on, or whatever's trending on Twitter, on our investments. I think that's a terrible mistake. And I frankly, we complain about it all the time when we see, people say, oh, we're going to divest from fossil fuel companies. We're going to divest from this.
Got earmuffs, but the ESG garbage has been terrible for the investment world.
Right. So stuff like that. I don't want to do that. I want us to make good investments and do good companies. And I do want our legacy fund to maybe prioritize investment strategies that serve North Dakota, maybe not necessarily the highest maximum return, but sometimes can be invested in North Dakota in ways that redound to us in other ways, other benefits than a higher rate of return. Those are the things I want, but I think it's hard to get there and while maintaining guardrails against undue meddling.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we also fully agree with that. We absolutely need to make sure that we're doing that, and we need to prioritize North Dakota investments. The legacy fund is the one area where we do provide a carve out from the prudent investor rule. Prudent investor rule is maximizing return for risk. We give a carve out so that we are able and willing to take a below market return if we're making North Dakota.
That's a recent innovation, right? I mean,
that was a recent innovation. We just did that recently. And we are doing that. I mean, so we are putting our dollars to work here in North Dakota. We love to compare ourselves to Alaska and the Alaska Permanent Fund. I know, Rob, your heart still sometimes longs for Alaska. We love to compare ourselves to the Alaska Permanent Fund. And I think that's a lofty goal and a great way to get to. But in some ways, we're well ahead of Alaska when it comes to our internal fund investment piece. So if you let's look at Alaska. Right now, the Alaska Permanent Fund is about $80 billion in invested assets. They were over $100 billion. They backed down to about $80 billion right now. But the earnings off of the Alaska Permanent Fund, in addition to the dividend payment checks that Alaska citizens get, the revenues off of that cover about 55% of the general fund revenues for the state of Alaska, are earnings off of the Alaska Permanent Fund. By comparison, our legacy fund at the time of last session, we're now at $11 billion. At the time of last session, we were a little over $9 billion. The earnings off of the legacy fund provided about 8% of our general fund revenues, $486 million, a long ways from 55%. And only 4% of our total state revenues once you took federal dollars out of there. But even with that smaller percentage compared to Alaska, Alaska started doing their in-state investment program in 2018. Right now, they've hired Barings and McKinley are the two firms they hired. We hired 50 South Capital. But in the 6 years since Alaska started their internal program, they've got about $166 million that they've invested in the state of Alaska through their permanent fund. Which is about 0.2% of their fund size. In our 3 years, we have $461 million invested in North Dakota, about 4% of our fund value. So in addition to the private equity stuff that I mentioned before with that $49 million of state money, about $100 million that we've committed, $49 million has actually been deployed. We also have our infrastructure loan program run through the Bank of North Dakota that has $50 million from the legacy fund going into 2% loans for road projects to help lower the cost for that infrastructure out. And we've had the BND CD match program, which was what we utilized to save Coal Creek to help broker the financing of that deal, as well as a few other ones. That has $311 million of low cost, below market return but great for North Dakota investments made out of there through the legacy fund. So we're sitting pretty good from an in-state investment standpoint, and we're also in the process of looking. We think with the current private equity strategy that 50 South has been doing, we think they've got an absorption rate of about $40 million a year of investments. So we're in the process of searching for another fund manager right now that can help us specifically on infrastructure or energy-related investments that we're hoping to be able to deploy another about $30 million a year through that fund manager in North Dakota. So we're trying to put this thing to work as fast as possible, but we don't want to, I don't want to put all this money, this cash into a T-shirt can and stand on the roof of the Capitol and fire. That's not the best way to make an investment. So we got
that. I don't think would be prudent.
Yeah, I don't think it would be Rob. I wish Beadle knew his stuff. I wish Beadle knew his stuff. I mean, he comes on here, and it's like he's grasping at straws.
Unprepared.
Well, my problem is I just need to figure out how to talk a little slower, and then maybe that'll sink in too. Because I tend to
need a 2-hour podcast to go through the investment strategies.
Yeah.
Hey, I would love it. People will be. It was perfect bedtime listening. We could do that really well.
I tell you what. Once we get past the legislative session, we hit low ebb for news items in North Dakota politics, and we may bring you on and do that.
We could do some deep dives. That'll be fun. And real quick, I know the clock is going to push you here soon. So before you guys move on, real quick comment on Measure 3. So Measure 3, the asset allocation adjustment, that all that does is codifies dropping the amount that the legislature can raid from the principal from 15 to 5. All the other language in there is just putting into the Constitution what already exists in statute in terms of the legacy earnings fund and what happened to the earnings pre-2017 and now. All that other stuff is existing law. It doesn't change a thing. But the adjustment and the asset allocation takes it. So right now, our assumed rate of return for the legacy fund is about 6.3% per year annualized return, just off of the investment piece. Just by being able to better invest that 10% delta of what the legislature can call would be about 50 basis point increase in terms of our very conservative returns. If we extrapolate that over the next 40 years, it'd be about $5 billion of additional earnings just from that one change, and about $15 billion in an additional principal just from that one change. So it's a great change that will help really take the shackles off this fund.
So yes on 3?
I love 3. Okay. It's a good policy.
You could have just said that. All right. I'm sorry. All right. We're going to let you go. Thomas, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate it.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, welcome back. We're actually going to do a third, because it's a busy time of season. We had a lot of guests on today. We're doing a third segment today just to talk a little bit about, well, I mean, I guess it's a story I wrote about late last night. And it seems like every couple of months I'm doing a story like this about a North Dakota political leader, usually a Republican, doing or saying something inappropriate. In this instance, we had State Senator Scott Meyer. He is running for re-election in District 18. His opponent is Kyle Thorson, who's a Democrat. And Kyle was out campaigning and had recently, he thinks this was the impetus for it, but had recently started running some ads critical of his opponent. I looked at the ads.
What a concept, Rob.
I looked at the ads. I didn't see anything untoward. It was just like, he voted for this, he voted for that. I mean, just normal stuff. I mean, if we can't talk about that in politics, what can we talk about? So he'd run these ads. Meyer apparently took exception to it. It began with a Facebook post of himself with a yard sign. He called his opponent an absolute coward. There were several follow-up replies to his
all from Scott Meyer.
All from Scott Meyer to his own Facebook post where he made, some additional intemperate remarks, and then began direct messaging Kyle Thorson, and in the direct messages, said, I quote, "Regardless how this election ends, you've picked a fight. This won't end on November 5th. I've done nothing to you, but I won't forget. Here's to your stupidity." Then he had another message that he sent directly to Thorson's or to his campaign Facebook page. He says, "My friends hate you so much. You talk too much, amigo. I haven't said expletive about you, but my special operators know you. Enjoy." And then he links to the Wikipedia page for special military operations. And then he said, they don't like being called out, especially like betas like you. So just completely inappropriate for anybody, frankly, let alone a state senator. Now, I spoke with Senator Meyer. He said he'd had a tough night. He'd had too much to drink. He said, I quote, "I made a mistake. He's running a good campaign." He said of Thorson. And he said, "I have no ill will toward Kyle. I was in a tough spot last night. I want him to know he's totally fine. Hopefully he'll accept my apology. If he doesn't, I totally understand." I understand that since then, Meyer has reached out to Thorson and apologized. He apparently made some remarks that his girlfriend had told him she was pregnant the night before, and this upset him, which is why he was drinking. I mean, I don't, there's no context that Senator Meyer has offered, or frankly, I think could offer, that justifies or excuses any of this. And not, I guess he's not really asking for an excuse, but it's just what he did was wrong. It was wrong. And as we're struggling in this environment of polarization and extremism, and we have people just hot, this is so unhelpful, and it's wrong, and there should be accountability for it.
Yeah, and here's the thing. He apologized to Kyle after you called him. After he knew this was going to be in the press, that's when he reached out to Kyle and apologized. I don't care if a state senator is sober, drunk, serious, or joking about causing violence to your opponent. It's inappropriate. Scott Meyer should not be in the state Senate. He should resign. Also, if this was the only time where Scott had issues with a short temper or going after people, Rob, you and I talked to a bunch of people who woke up in the morning to text messages or Facebook messages from Scott Myers during his time in the state. Or, I live with one of his former colleagues who has seen Scott, either being liquored up and calling people or having a really short trigger during the legislative session. This is not a young person. This is not a 21-year-old who got some bad news about impregnating his girlfriend, got liquored up, and decided to do these things. This is a 40-some-year-old man, a state senator, saying this to his constituents. It's not only inappropriate, I would suggest it should be criminal, and he should be charged. Because here's the deal. I have some times when I'm in a dark place, and there's a lot of people who've been in a dark place and get liquored up and go punch somebody. They don't get to say I was in a dark place and I did this stupid thing and therefore it's not criminal. The Republicans in the state should be holding Scott Meyer to the same standard as they hold Nico Rios. The reality is right now, the Republicans in North Dakota hold the Bastiats to one standard and their own people, depending on who they hang out with and who their friends are, to a different standard. Scott Meyer should resign today based on this. He should not seek re-election. He should figure out the issues he has with alcohol and get healthy and then come back and run another time. But this is not somebody who has the judgment or temperament to be in the legislature. It's a privilege to serve in the state Senate, and it's a privilege that Scott Meyer does not deserve when he acts like this.
I agree. One thing that I want to say is people, it's always dependent on, whose ox is getting gored. If this person's more on my team, and frankly, Scott Meyer, the way he votes in the legislature, is more on my team than Kyle Thorson, 100%. Which makes it hard sometimes to say, well, this person shouldn't be in. And I guess the way I think of it, I'm really tired of this idea that we have to tolerate bad behavior from elected officials because we're afraid that the other side's going to win. Well, if you elect somebody who behaves badly, the other side should win. I don't know, and it's conservatives do not have a lock on this. Although in North Dakota, we've been having trouble with a string. It just seems like there's Republicans in the headlines all the time. Claire Corey from Grand Forks got a DUI not that long ago. We got the Ray Holmberg thing. We got the Jason Doctor thing. We've got the Nico Rios thing. It's one after another. And the thing is, there are a lot of people who are capable. They're smart and capable of serving in the legislature. We don't have to settle for this. Now, his resignation is complicated by the fact that we're less than 2 weeks out from an election. He cannot withdraw his name from the ballot. He's probably going to get elected. He could resign after that. I would be surprised if he did. He's probably not going to, but he should, because that's the standard everybody held Nico Rios to, and that's the standard Scott Meyer should be held to. I am tired of this stuff. And again, it's not a one-off incident either. I mean, I have woken up in the morning, not threatening messages, but messages, direct messages sent to me on Twitter, whatever, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, that, intemperate responses to something I've written, mostly with the friction between Scott and I have been over Donald Trump. And he doesn't like some of the things I'm saying about Donald Trump. And then he sends me things at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I look at those things thinking, I kind of know what happened there. So that's, right. And at the end of the day, on a human to human level, what I would really like for Senator Meyer to do is to get some help, figure out this problem, find a way to live your life. Of all the things that are going on in his life, serving in the legislature is important, but it's not as important as his health. Right. It's not as important as his well-being. And so I think also for his sake, step aside, get some help. But we don't do that in politics in America anymore. Things that, and it's not just Donald Trump. It is flowed down from Donald Trump, but I would argue in some ways it existed before, where you had people clinging to office through scandals and just riding it out and leaning on the partisanship from voters. And I wrote something about this recently, saying that if you're not willing to change your vote, no matter what the person, the candidate on your side, no matter what they do, if you're not willing to change your vote, you are not participating in democracy. Because how else does it work? How else does it work? If politicians can do whatever they want and there's no consequences for it, they're just going to be enabled. I mean, if you're upset about politicians behaving badly or behaving venally or being self-serving or not listening, but they keep getting reelected anymore, why should you expect anything to change?
And I think, Rob, what upsets me most about this one, and there's obviously the series of things, what Scott Meyer threatened violence against Kyle Thorson for was literally pointing out how he voted in the legislature. How are we supposed to run elections in this state or anywhere if by simply saying, my opponent voted this way and I would vote different, and the response to that is threats at 1:30 in the morning about his special ops friends, which, by the way, is just bizarro world. I'm not going to beat you up on my friends well. It's childish. And if a high school student did this to another high school student, they would be suspended from school. There would be repercussions to that person. I also think when Scott Meyer has a job, he's on several different boards, those organizations need to look at, does Scott Meyer represent, I'm not saying he should get fired from his job, but if he's got volunteer jobs on boards, those organizations should be looking at who's representing them. And if it's somebody who does this kind of thing to a constituent and threatens violence on them, should he be serving on those boards?
Well, I'm mostly concerned about the public service. What happens with the private organizations is whatever. That's not my circus, not my monkeys. But I am concerned about the public service, and I am concerned about elevating. I don't know where this attitude has come from, where we just don't think it matters how these people behave, or we laugh, there's almost sort of a fatalism that is rooted in a cynicism about politics. It's so fashionable to say, oh, they're all alike, they're all corrupt, they're all terrible. People on the left say it, people on the right say it. Well, the thing is that in a lot of ways, that perpetuates the problem. If you just accept that, because what you're doing is you're just accepting that that's just the way it's going to be. And I would argue it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, I would argue that most of the people serving in our legislature are fine, upstanding people. Not perfect. Some of them got flaws. I get it. But most of them are good, upstanding people who don't do this. And if they do this, then it's okay to say, no, you got to be out of office for a while. You got to go do something else.
The vast, vast majority of our North Dakota legislators are good people. They should not accept this from their colleagues. They should not accept the fact that Scott Meyer and others do things like this because it makes them look bad. It makes the public not trust them. They should not accept this. So Republican senators should be calling for Scott Meyer to resign today. The state GOP should be calling for him to resign today. It's bad for the state. It's bad for their party, and they should do something about it. And it hurts their reputations of trying to do right for the people of North Dakota. You can't threaten people, your opponents. Like, we live in a place where we decide these things at the ballot box.
Well, here's reality, though. Most of these Republicans are going to vote for Donald Trump, who threatens his opponents on a regular basis. You know, I just, the degree to which this has been normalized, and again, I mean, Trump is so egregious. I think the miasma around that clouds out some of the problems we have on the left, but it is so frustrating. I think that we should expect better from our politicians. And if we don't, and the only way, at the end of the day, the only thing that we as voters can do to make them accountable is to make them lose when they do stuff like that. That's it. That is the only weapon we have, is our vote. Because if you just say, well, I really don't like what he said, but I'm going to vote for him anyway because I'm so scared of the other side. I mean, that's what's happening with Donald Trump. I have conversations with Republicans like that all the time. Well, I don't like any of the things he says, and he's terrible, and he's immoral, and he's unethical, but I really don't want Kamala Harris to win.
So Kyle Thorson becoming the 5th Democratic senator in the state Senate is not going to dramatically change the trajectory, but it does send a message. And what I get frustrated by is we often hear North Dakota's different. North Dakota's different. This crap that happens nationally and their campaigns being so negative and this kind of stuff, North Dakota's different. Well, let's prove it then. Let's prove that North Dakota's different.
You don't have standards if you're not willing to live up to the standards. And I am very sympathetic to people who struggle with alcohol. Very sympathetic to people who struggle with mental health or substance abuse. I don't want a mistake like this. I have struggled with those things in the past. I don't think a mistake should end anyone's career or end anyone's life, but I also am a conservative, and conservatives used to believe in accountability. Conservatives used to believe in the free market. How does a marketplace of ideas work in politics if bad ideas or bad candidates aren't allowed to fail? So yeah, that's where you and I are singing out of the same choir book here, but it is frustrating. And I am tired of the behavior. I am tired of the excuses and the rationalizations. It's got to stop. It's got
the double standard. Why is Nico Rios treated differently than Scott Meyer? They are giving oxygen to the Bastiat far-right folks here by not treating everybody equally. The Bastiat has a point when they say, why would Nico Rios resign when you're not holding anybody else accountable? Why would he?
How can you complain about their behavior if you're not willing to hold yourself, to that standard? And it's got to start. And by the way, the only people who can, Republicans have to hold one another accountable. And Democrats, when it comes up, which it inevitably will, because no one side has a lock on this sort of thing, Democrats have to hold their side accountable as well to standards. So, that's where we're at. Just a hugely frustrating situation. And that's right. I haven't weighed in yet. I haven't written about it yet, but yes, I think Scott Meyer should resign. Understanding that there's some realities with the election that he can't pull his name off the ballot, but he could certainly resign after the election. He could certainly be appointed, have somebody appointed differently, and move on with our lives. But and again, on a personal level, I hope he gets some help.
Yeah, in the best way to get help is to not be in the state Senate right now.
Yeah. All right, we're going to end it there. Hey, coming up on Friday, we're going to have another debate. This actually, and I guess I teased it a little bit before, this got pitched to us, which, by the way, I love. I love that people are looking at this podcast and saying, this is a place where we want to come and we want to debate and we want to be heard. That's wonderful. So we're going to have a couple of candidates from District 10. It's one of the few competitive legislative races in the state. It's going to be George Roughhead on the Republican side. He's running for the Senate. The incumbent is Democrat Ryan Braunberger. They're going to come on. We're going to put them through their paces. That's going to be a lot of fun coming up on Friday. So be sure to listen to that. Otherwise, thank you to everybody. By the way, we're not doing the survey anymore. Thank you to everybody who filled that out. That was super helpful. Really appreciate that. And we got great things in store for this podcast going ahead. So that's it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll
Go Dodgers.
Go Yankees. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Send me an email at rport@forumcom.com. That's forumcom with 2 M's.com. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. I can realize how intimidating it is to be taking on America's team